So we'll jump into the Q&A session now. So we've had a couple come through online as we've been talking, but we also probably have about 20 questions that came through at the point of when you guys all registered for the webinar. So I might start there, but happy to take additional questions as you guys are listening and kind of thinking about the material you've just heard. We do also, as Lucy mentioned, have Eloise here from AEMO to assist with some of those questions that are perhaps more specifically directed at AEMO. But I'll start with some of the kind of scope and design questions that came through during the registration process. So there's a question here: are projects that demonstrate the benefits of solar forecasting at both 5 minutes ahead and greater timescales, so say 1 to 2 hours, are they eligible, or is it just 5 minutes ahead only? So the core focus for this initiative is to get those kind of 5 minute ahead dispatch forecasts, I guess, being generated, submitted to AEMO, and then testing the accuracy of those forecasts. However, if you have technology that has additional capabilities, tell us about that, because if it can do 5 minutes and other timescales, again, one of our objectives under this program is to improve the technical readiness of forecasting providers. So if you've got a variety of timescales you can operate at, please do let us know, and that also can contribute to the merit assessment of your EOI. Next question is, how long are the trials designed to be? So this is something we're actually interested in testing with the market at this EOI stage. We haven't specified that you've got to be done and dusted in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. You tell us, based on the design of your project, how long you need. What we've heard from the market is that there's a quite pressing kind of commercial and also system operation needs that need to be satisfied. So we're probably wanting to get through projects quickly, get the learnings out, test the systems so we can understand the benefits of it. But having said that, we will need to generate statistically robust sets of data to analyse. So I guess there's a trade-off there between making sure it's robust, but also that we're moving it at pace to meet those objectives. Following question: non-scheduled generators and residential PV rooftop require the same level of short-term forecasting for AEMO's benefit. Eloise, I'll warn you, I might throw to you just in case I'm saying anything out of school here, but we agree. The focus on this initiative is the dispatch of semi-scheduled generators, that is large wind and solar generators, but we certainly recognise that there are growing needs on the sort of consumer-owned PV side of things to make sure that adequate forecasting is in place. And my understanding is that AEMO is also looking at this issue and has been in conversations with a range of different providers and industry about it. It is, however, not the focus of this initiative. So if you present to us an EOI that's all about residential solar PV forecasting, we'll probably put it to one side for the time being and focus on the core objective of this program of work, which is around semi-scheduled, NEM registered market participant generators and 5 minute ahead forecasting. Eloise, did you want to add anything to what I've said there?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The only other thing that I would add is that in the case of a non-scheduled applicant, or if non-scheduled was combined with semi-scheduled or something else, AEMO doesn't actually incorporate forecasts for non-scheduled generators into dispatch, so it'd have to be analysed separate.
Right, thank you. That's perfect, Eloise, because that was the question that followed the next. So that is, so just to reinforce that, if you're a non-scheduled generator, you'd be looked at separately by AEMO, and if you want to be eligible, you'd need to be bundled together with a semi-scheduled generator as part of an EOI. Can a bid include a desktop research component in addition to the technology trial? I think at the EOI stage, we are open to that. Clearly, as we've said, we want to see operational deployment of forecasting technologies. If you've purely got a desktop analysis or modelling that's not based on kind of a field trial and actual inputting of real forecast data from real generators into AEMO systems, again, you've got to be outside of scope. However, if there's some desktop analysis, whether that's of data, or other elements of a project that you want to include in your EOI description, we're okay with that. But please note that the core intent of the round is that operational deployment of forecasting technologies and integration with AEMO system. Will storage at solar and wind farms be required to be included in forecasts? So I think, as we've mentioned, core of the initiative is around semi-scheduled generators, wind and solar, and their 5-minute ahead forecasts. If you do have storage co-located at a wind farm, I think that's certainly something to flag in your EOI, and we can take a look at that. I know, and Eloise, please, you can jump in here again. The registration of battery storage at generation sites is something that there's a lot of work being done on that at the moment. So the manner in which that battery was being utilised at the location would be something you'd need to tease out in your EOI. But Eloise, I don't know if you want to add on that in terms of battery or other forms of storage at wind and solar sites.
Yeah, stole the words right out of my mouth, actually. It does all depend on how the battery is registered. When AEMO do forecasting, we do it on a DUID basis. So if you do have a battery that has been registered as a scheduled battery or a non-scheduled with a separate DUID, then we're not able to incorporate at this point.
Right. A question here on the expected number of projects, the average expected funding, and preference for supplier-led or user-led. So let me take the first two, which is the expected number and the average funding. So we're not putting any, I guess, we don't have any preconceived ideas about the cost of individual projects. And certainly, I guess, we don't generally put out there what we expect to pay for a project. We want to have a look at each individual EOI. You tell us what you need. As Zoe and Mottle have both said, ARENA takes a very commercial view when it comes to funding, and we don't start at 50%. We start at 0% and work up, as opposed to 50% and working back. So we want to look at what you actually need to get your project off the ground, and there's a really clear justification of the funding that's required there. And so that then rolls across, I guess, onto the number of projects that we expect to see. So as part of the announcement, we did let the market know that we've got a funding envelope of approximately $10 million to invest in this initiative. We don't have to spend all of that. And talking with vendors out there, it looks like there's various pricing levels or pricing points in the market. So we're keen to use the EOI process to better understand the potential project costs, and therefore the number of projects we might have in a portfolio. Do we have a preference for supplier-led or user-led? So I guess by that it's whether it's a technology vendor or a generator leading the bid. We don't have a preference. I think we just want to see a strong project consortium with a clear project delivery and implementation plan that can hit on the key objectives of the program. So we don't have a kind of a preference either way, as long as you've got a strong consortium there. So next step,
just as part of that consortium, I think at this stage, we don't necessarily expect you to have signed agreements with each of those consortium partners. Again, it's almost a spectrum of merit. So if you've got something which is really locked in, that's going to say, yes, that helps de-risk the project. If you just say, these are potential people I could approach to be in my consortium, that may not be as meritorious. So it's that continuum which you should think through as you're thinking of your consortium.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Well. That's a really helpful point. Next steps after the trial, I think, in a perfect world, we'd be able to show that all these technologies provide better, more accurate forecasts, and there's a commercial case for it. And long term, you can see there's potential for changes in the way in which semi-scheduled generators provide forecasts and are dispatched. So that's one scenario, but there are potential other scenarios. But we're doing this to inform some key decisions by the market and by AEMO as to how forecasting for semi-scheduled generators should occur going forward. So it certainly won't be a trial that comes and goes and then there's nothing ever happens. Our intent and our hope is that we can show that there's a better way for both the market from AEMO's perspective, from a system security, that they get more accurate forecasts, and for wind and solar generators that they have those benefits that Lucy talked about earlier. So we're going to be really strong on kind of following through on the results and impacts of individual trial projects.
And it's worth flagging here as well that separate to ARENA's funding that we're providing, AEMO are building the capability to do this. So we're partnering so that ARENA can assist with the testing and deployment of this capability. But it doesn't mean that when the arena funding goes away, that the capability goes away. It will be in place. And the core requirement there will be just validating that before generators can submit their own forecasts, that they do fit in with the requirements that AEMO has on accuracy and data quality.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Got a question here. Are you looking for a centralized or decentralized system? I'm going to interpret that as centralized is almost the current system that we have, that AEMO generates forecasts using the ACEFs and AWEFs models, and those are effectively provided to generators. A decentralized model will be individual generators providing their forecasts into AEMO. So yes, it's the latter, that we're looking to test different approaches for sort of self-forecasting by generators. So can all the data from each site be fed back to forecast for sites?
I think this one, you can answer this. So can all the data from each site be fed back to forecast other sites in proximity, or will each site need its sensors?
I think it'd be good to get some more information on what that question actually means. AEMO are looking for one forecast per DUID. How you produce that forecast and validate that forecast is up to the individual sites. We'll, of course, do our own due diligence before putting that into dispatch or agreeing to your forecast, but I think I'd need some more information on that question to provide a fuller answer.
And that may just be, again, thinking about your knowledge sharing. You may say, I've got all these sensors deployed at this site. I am proposing to make it all publicly available to others, and they can, via an API that I may publish on the other end, make that available to the market for other forecasting. So I'd maybe interpret that as, how much data are you looking to share, or how much are we going to mandate that is shared? I think there's that balance of, again, more quality and public sharing to help advance this concept for all participants is going to be valuable as we look at the assessment.
Final question on kind of scope and design that says, will this involve resource assessment capabilities for feasibility studies of wind and solar projects? So the answer to that would be no. This is not about doing resource assessments for wind and solar at sort of greenfield sites. This is very much about wind and solar forecasting at sites, at generators that will be operational from middle of this year, or who are already operating. I understand that a number of the forecasting companies also do resource assessments at sites, but this is a different particular, I guess, product or skill set or use case, if you like, that we're looking to utilise. There's a couple of arena process questions that I'll just touch on very briefly, because I think a number of them we've kind of covered off. Is there any template and guidelines for submission of EOIs? That should hopefully be clear now. The ArenaNet online application portal is where you head, plus those other supplementary documents and guidelines that we've signalled a couple of times in this webinar. Question that we get asked a lot: how should universities apply to this funding? Is it mandatory to have an industry partner? Hopefully that is clear now. Universities are free to be part of a consortium of different groups. So it is mandatory to have an industry partner. And as we've indicated, those projects that actually involve a market semi-scheduled generator, wind and solar generator, will be viewed as higher merit. Couple of questions for AEMO, Eloise. So there's one here about whether the draft API spec to be used for submission of the 5-minute self-forecasts, can that be made available?
So AEMO is targeting early to mid-July to make the API specification document available.
Great. So what that means, I guess, for people is when you're doing your EOI, you won't know the exact format of that API, and the kind of, therefore there may be a degree of uncertainty around the integration costs. So just, that's just a reality of the timing and the scheduling of where we're at. That's fine. Arena sort of acknowledges that, and you may want to flag that if there's additional costs associated with integration or any uncertainties there, just flag that in your EOI. But obviously that's going to be the same for every applicant. So we're aware of that. And then Eloise, there's another question here that says, who is the best contact at AEMO re API integration and cybersecurity requirements?
So the best point of contact at AEMO is to email our inbox, so op.forecasting@aemo.com.au, and we'll be able to either respond to you via email or direct you to the best person to answer your question. So once again, that's op.forecasting@aemo.com.au.
Great. Thanks, Eloise. We've still got about 9 minutes, or by my watch, so we'll keep going. We've got a bunch of questions that have come in online since we've been talking. So there's a question here that says, would ARENA consider funding the Bureau of Meteorology to provide certain data sets that could be used in the trial? Probably not going to commit to that online on a webinar, but if you guys at the BOM, or if there's someone that's keen to get the BOM involved, I'd suggest just shoot us an email to the forecasting@arena.gov.au. Let us know what you've got in mind and we can have a chat about it. When will the outcome of successful grant applications be announced? So as we mentioned in our timeline, maybe I can just go back up to our timeline here. So people should be able to see on the screen now that timeline. So EOIs close on the 9th of May, and then about a month later, we'll be notifying those entities that have been successful with their EOIs, and they'll be invited to submit a full application. And then in the following months that follow, we'd expect those applications to be coming in, and we'll do our assessment process. So hopefully that answers that question. Maybe a question, Eloise, for you. I don't know the answer to this. We might take it on notice, but will the AWEF's and ACEF's forecast data be made available to participants during the trials for performance comparisons?
Yeah, that one I'll have to take on notice, and we'll provide an answer for that when we send out the information after the webinar.
Yeah, great. There's another question there about the technical detail on the API, on AEMO's API, as this affects project budget. So as I've just outlined, we acknowledge that the timing doesn't quite line up in terms of the final specification being available. So just flag that in your EOIs. Just note that there's a budget line item there and maybe a work stream around integration that has a little bit of uncertainty around it with regard to the integration with that API. So there's a question here about whether a large solar or wind farm in Australia but outside the NEM can also be included in an application. On the surface, I'd say no. We want market participants or market generators being involved. So the whole point is to show that improved forecasting by generators in the NEM so they can provide improved forecasts to AEMO for those benefits that we've outlined. So we're only really looking at those generators that are in the NEM. So there's a question here about the treatment of internal resource costs. So Mottle, do you want to answer that one?
So again, internal resource costs, whether that's considered cash or in-kind contributions. So again, really encourage the eligible expenditure item in the Advancing Renewables Program Guideline. Short answer is that existing staff is an in-kind contribution, and that should be not at the value that staff member could charge as a consultant externally, but it's almost at that's at the PAYG amount. If you have to hire new staff in addition for this specific project, then we'd look at that more as a cash contribution. But again, that should weigh up with a market rate effectively of what that staff member would cost.
Yeah, great. There is a whole appendix in the Advancing Renewables Program Guidelines on the treatment of expenditure and the classifications. And also remember that this is an EOI stage, and so if you're really confused about how the treatment of specific line items, send an email to that forecasting@arena.gov.au, and we can provide you with some guidance. Have a look at the program guidelines and that appendix there that's around those the treatments. And then finally, it is an EOI. If you've got something classified incorrectly, that's okay. It's something that we can provide you with feedback. And as long as you've kind of represented that budget properly, but just maybe have line items or categories slightly askew, I think that's something that we can deal with and we'd look to work with you on. I think that brings us to the end of most of our questions.
I've got two more questions that have come in here, Phil. So one is, Can foreign companies participate?
So yes, foreign companies can participate in the program. However, as long as they meet the other specification, and as long as no more than 10% of the ARENA funds are expended overseas, that excludes sort of capital purchase items that may be manufactured internationally. So again, there's guidance there around the kind of use of ARENA grant funding on international expenditure. But certainly we recognise there's a lot of international players in the renewable energy space in Australia. We think that's a good thing. We want to see a vibrant and competitive market. So if, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria around, if you are the lead applicant, as long as you meet that eligibility criteria around the kind of Australian registration of the organisation and the kind of expenditure guidelines around where and how ARENA funds are spent, then yes, you can participate.
Yeah. And then the last question was saying, what is the scale of the PV and wind? And the scale is so that it's sufficient to be semi-scheduled. So 30 megawatts is typically that size.
Great. And actually that reminds me, there was another question up here from a university that has 6 megawatts of solar, and they're not sure whether it can meet the eligibility criteria. So if it's sort of 6 megawatts of behind the meter solar, no, that wouldn't be eligible. It's got to be a registered semi-scheduled generator participating in the NEM, that's earning the spot price in the NEM effectively. So, you know, behind the meter solar assets that aren't participating in the market are not eligible generators for this activity. Okay, unless there's any late questions. Oh, there is. I shouldn't have asked. We've answered that about when do we expect to announce funded projects. That's the timeline that's on your screen at the moment. How long can projects run? I believe I answered that earlier, but please tell us how long you need to generate robust data sets and to do your implementation. That's a key bit of kind of learning for us as part of the EOIs. There's a longer question here about a couple of different scenarios, which I might take on notice and will provide a written response to, just because it's a bit of a complex question with, yeah, a couple of options and scenarios in it. So we'll provide some specific feedback on those scenarios and options for project structure in writing after the webinar. So I think that brings us to the end. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to my colleagues from ARENA for stepping us through all of the detail, and thank you to Eloise from AEMO for joining us and providing some commentary there during the Q&A. We've had over 60 participants in the webinar, so we think there's a lot of interest in the market in this initiative. We're really excited by it, and we're glad that it's sort of stimulated so much interest out there in the market. We look forward to receiving your expressions of interest by the 9th of May. If you do have questions, please do reach out to myself or the team using that forecasting@arena.gov.au email address, and we will get back to you. Other than that, we'll stop the webinar there. Thanks, everyone.